Welcome to our December 2016 webinar, How to Be More Outcomes-Based in Wraparound Practice. I'm John Osowski, Project Manager for the National Wraparound Initiative, and I'd like to begin with a few housekeeping announcements. Please see the advice on this slide to make the most of your GoToMeeting experience. In particular, please note that during the presentation, all audience members will be muted, but you can send your questions to us via the chat feature. A recording of this webinar will be made available online shortly after this webinar ends, along with several resources from the link shown below. This webinar is brought to you by the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Child, Youth, and Family Mental Health, NTAC, operated by the National Technical Assistance Network for Children's Behavioral Health, the TA Network, funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, Center for Mental Health Services, Child, Adolescent, and Family Branch. This webinar is hosted by the National Wraparound Initiative, a partner in the National TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health, operated by and coordinated through the University of Maryland. So welcome to today's webinar, How to Be More Outcomes-Based in Wraparound Practice. Our presenters today will be Dr. Jennifer Scheurer-Coldiron with the University of Washington Wraparound Evaluation and Research Team, and Kim Coviello, also known as Covi, from the National Wraparound Implementation Center. We'll hear from our presenters in a moment, but first, we'd like to invite everyone who registered for this webinar to stay in touch with us by signing up for our monthly newsletter. We feature links to NWI resources like this webinar, as well as news and events of interest to the field. Announcements about special events, like the National Wraparound Implementation Academy, which was held in September of this year, are also included in the newsletter. You'll receive an invitation via email after the webinar, and we hope you will accept it. You can sign up on your own from our webpage, nwi.pdx.edu, and scroll down to the newsletter sign-up form. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're really excited about the large turnout. We think this is a very, very important topic, and we're really excited to bring you some information about this. So today's webinar is about being more outcomes-based in wraparound practice. I just want to clarify that this is not going to cover things like measuring outcomes at a program or system level or about evaluating wraparound practice in general. We are really going to be focusing on practice at the care coordinator level. So it's about putting the outcomes-based principle into action with youth, families, and with teams. So we're going to be talking about actually how do you measure progress at the youth and family level. So today's objectives of this webinar are to increase your understanding about the importance of being outcomes-based in wraparound, why this is such an important element of practice that we are starting to pay more and more attention to. We hope to develop some insight around what types of outcomes you should be overtly measuring in your wraparound practice with your youth and families and teams. So how to do that in concert with your youth and families. Also, we want to make sure that you learn some different ways to actually measure outcomes and to how to track progress over time, and then to figure out how to what kind of outcomes data can actually help your team adjust the plan. So this isn't about just collecting data for data's sake. It really is about how to collect information consistently over time to inform your wraparound practice, how to use that information that you're gathering over time to figure out when and how to adjust the plan so that you can get the best possible outcomes for the youth and families that you're working with. So that in mind, we wanted to just start with a quick poll to see kind of what people think right now is the wraparound principle that is most correlated with positive outcomes. So John, if you can advance, let's see, there we go. So we have a poll. John is going to launch it right now, and we would love it if everybody could vote. So the question is, which principle of wraparound is best correlated with positive outcomes? Where is there evidence to support a wraparound principle and its connection to positive youth and family outcomes?
Great, and we've got about a third of people that have voted so far, so we'll give it a few more seconds if we can.
Okay.
Great, and it looks like we've got around 80% of people voting, so I'm going to close the poll now.
Okay.
And let's look at the results.
I am trying to see the results. I cannot see them.
Oh, it should be there momentarily.
Okay.
Do you see them yet, Jennifer?
I don't.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well,
you can tell me what it says.
yeah, the system says that it's showing it, so I'll go over the responses. Natural supports was responded at 19%.
There we go.
And there you go.
Yes, okay, now I see.
Choice. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, natural supports, family voice and choice. So family voice and choice, it's not surprising that most of you, or the majority of you, think that that is the principle that is most connected to positive outcomes. That's something that we focus so much on. It's so important to the wraparound and system of care philosophy, as is being strengths-based and incorporating natural supports. So as you can see, most people on the call, it's kind of almost like evenly split across most of these, but family voice and choice is the one that won. John, can I get control back of the slides and then I can advance?
Sure, I believe you should have that now.
Okay, great. So in fact, it is actually tracking progress. Overt tracking of progress is the component of wraparound that is most correlated with positive outcomes for families. We actually have the most evidence to say that concrete tracking of progress, being very explicit about what you're trying to accomplish and tracking how you're doing over time, making adjustments based on that information is actually the area of practice that we have the most evidence around it being related to positive outcomes. That's partly because we actually don't have a ton of controlled studies on the key practice elements of wraparound. So while we feel that being youth and family driven, being strengths-based, incorporating natural supports is a very important component of wraparound and is really what sets it apart from many other approaches, and we definitely don't want to lose sight of those really important areas of practice, of community development. It is actually being outcomes-based that we can say is a very important component of wraparound and might be the most important part to actually helping youth and families meet their goals. And so being outcomes-based actually has very strong research behind it in the behavioral and mental health fields. And in general, collecting and monitoring and actually using that information, the structured and objective information, or data as we call it, that if you can do that, your clients, your youth and families will actually achieve more positive outcomes. Unfortunately, we have evidence also that says that in most wraparound teams, outcomes are not being attended to sufficiently. There is some research that says in fewer than a third of wraparound teams actually track success using indicators of progress, or even consistently track whether or not whether or not tasks are being completed. So the purpose of today's webinar is to really raise awareness about the importance of this element of wraparound practice and to give really concrete guidance about how this can be done. So how to systematically use information and how to make it family friendly, how to make it approachable, and how to really use that information. So why is this so important? Establishing mutually accepted goals and indicators of progress really gets everybody on the same page. It can really clarify the purpose of the wraparound process, and most importantly, it can really clarify the purpose of the child and family team meeting and make those meetings more efficient. So it also very importantly lets the team very quickly know when the wrong needs have been prioritized or strategies aren't working, and when they need to be adjusted. So if you are consistently monitoring progress towards meeting needs, if you're consistently monitoring objective outcomes of days attended at school or positive interactions with family members, that can help sort of cut through some of the clutter and other things that are going on in a youth and family's life that still need to be attended to, still need to be talked about. But again, the purpose of Wraparound is to help families make progress towards meeting the needs that brought them into Wraparound in the first place. So being very explicit about what you're trying to accomplish and touching base on those at the very beginning of child and family team meetings can give really good information and can create more rapid adjustments and more positive change. It also can be very empowering for teams to see the degree of progress being made and that things are actually indeed changing. So if at the very beginning of the Wraparound process you establish, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's how we're going to measure whether or not we are making progress. Again, within the face of everything else that's going on in the youth and families' lives, you can touch base and say, you know, this is how we said we would know if things were getting better, and look, they are getting better. Or they might not be, and therefore we need to make changes. But it can be very empowering for teams to actually see that information over time, especially if there was good teaming at the very beginning and mutual agreement around how progress is going to be monitored. It can also, importantly, help to highlight when a youth and family is ready for transition. So instead of sort of letting families hang out for a really long time or have the needs constantly be changing, if you've made it very clear from the very beginning what you're coming together to accomplish and you're tracking that over time, it can really instigate a conversation when it looks like things have improved sufficiently and are have sustained for several months. That, hey, are you guys ready to go? Are you ready to start really talking about transition, or are there other things we need to accomplish? Or there might be some disagreement between a youth and family member about whether or not they're ready for transition. And tracking, overtly tracking progress and these sorts of things can really help bring some of those disagreements to light and air them and facilitate a good conversation. And finally, it can really help to maintain hope and cohesiveness for a team. So again, you can imagine if it's really empowering for a family to see you know, we're making progress, we're getting closer to being able to manage on our own. Similarly, if you're helping a team, you know, see all of this hard work that we're doing, all of this, you know, all of these meetings, all of these extra tasks, that this is really making progress for this family. Or, you know, we can identify immediately that we need to change things. And it creates a shared sense of purpose in a way that, you know, often doesn't actually come together. If you help people really understand this is very clearly with laser focus, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and get people to start talking about it in that way, it can be very empowering and very, very effective and efficient. So the question is, what can you track? Often when people hear about being outcomes-based, they think about standardized assessments, things like the CANS or the CAFIS or a depression scale or something like that. And those can be good tools if they're relevant and if they're easy to administer. But today we're really going to focus mainly on things that are more individualized, how to track individualized, or sometimes they're called idiographic goals and outcomes. So how do you take a very individualized plan of care and boil that down to meaningful and individualized goals and tasks and needs that you can actually track? And there are many different junctures within the wraparound practice where concrete and consistent information is helpful. So, you know, starting at the very minute level, you should and could be tracking whether or not tasks are being completed fully and in a timely manner. You can create ways to really stay on top of that with all of the different teams that you're working with. And that helps you understand if strategies are actually being implemented as planned. If those strategies are being implemented, then the question becomes, is implementing those strategies actually getting us closer to meeting the underlying need? So just because people are doing a lot of hard work doesn't actually mean that you're getting closer to meeting that need. And that is a connection that often is not being tracked within wraparound teams. So we really encourage the measurement and the continual monitoring of whether or not progress is being made towards meeting the need. If you're going to measure anything, that might be the most important thing. As you move closer to meeting that need, then the question becomes, are we actually seeing changes in the behaviors, the risk behaviors, or the reasons why the youth and family came into wraparound? And those are often considered to be kind of the behavioral outcomes, or the more kind of concrete things that you can measure, the things that you can see. Those are important to measure as well. But we really also encourage people to look at the underlying need, the deep need that's driving those behaviors as well. And then ultimately, the question is meeting these needs and changing these behaviors actually getting us closer to meeting the family's vision, helping that family accomplish kind of the bigger picture? What do they want? What does it look like to them to be a healthy, functioning family? You can be tracking all of these different things. And here's another way to look at it. This is a flow chart of how the different pieces of a plan of care can fit together. And the blue boxes are opportunities to be more outcomes-based. So it's similar information to what I just presented, but here you can see how the tasks feed into strategies. The strategies are designed to try to meet that underlying need. And you could and should be tracking whether or not the tasks are being completed, the strategy is being implemented, and then whether or not the underlying need is being met, and whether or not the desired outcomes, again, those behavioral changes are happening. So we at the National Wraparound Implementation Center believe that if you're seeing change in that underlying need, if you're getting closer to meeting that underlying need, then you most likely will be seeing changes in those desired outcomes. So you most likely will be seeing improved behavior, decreases in risk behaviors and things like that. And then ultimately, the underlying need, having that being met, makes the team feel like they're really meeting their mission, and the family that they're meeting their vision. So it all wraps up and connects very logically. And again, you should be collecting information consistently over time on all of these different areas to make sure that the plan of care is really working. The plan of care is kind of it is a logic model in some ways. It comes together, and there's assumptions between the connections between the tasks and the strategies and the underlying need. And all of those different connections should be attended to, and there should be information to back up, yes, this strategy is actually meeting the underlying need, and we have evidence of that over time. And that's really powerful for teams. And when we get into next year, we hope to present more about using data at a program and system level. It can be very powerful for a program to be able to have that information as well. So we have another poll for you just to get a sense about what people are currently doing out there. So I just went over several different aspects of a plan of care, and we're wondering which aspects of wraparound are you currently measuring progress on, and we hope that you can choose all that choose all that apply. So if you're currently consistently measuring on some sort of objective scale progress towards meeting a mission, a vision, or progress towards meeting getting needs met, please let us know. So John, can you open up that poll?
It should be open right now. People are voting.
Great, thank you. I can only see my own screen, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We've got about half of the folks. We'll give them a few more seconds.
Okay.
Okay, great, and I think we've got everyone that wanted to voted, so I'm going to close the poll right now.
Okay, great.
And I'm going to share it.
There we go. Interesting. Okay.
Okay. So it looks like, this is really interesting, we have actually a lot of people who, about 83%, who are tracking outcomes and behavioral change in their wraparound plans of care. We have about 75% of participants who are tracking progress towards need met, followed by 65% who are tracking task accomplishments, and then about less than half are tracking movement towards family vision and or team mission, and about 40% tracking strategy implementation. So now that we have a better idea of what different wraparound practitioners and programs are tracking, let's explore how we're going to go about tracking these different outcome measures in wraparound.
Yeah, we'd love to know from you in the chat box kind of how you're doing these different things, so we can see that at the end.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Okay, Covey, you're on.
All right, let's see. For some reason, it is not showing on my screen, and it may just be due to the weather here. John, do you think that you could take over control of the PowerPoint?
Yes, of course.
It's raining pretty hard here and thundering and lightning, so it may just be that.
Okay.
All right. So to get started, let's first talk about how we measure progress towards family vision, the team mission, and need statements in wraparound. So in order to measure these components, families and teams frequently decide to use a rating scale. The rating scale can really be whatever the team decides, but it should be consistent across all child and family team meetings. So for example, if you decide to use a 0 to 4 scale at the initial child and family team meeting, you should not change it to a 0 to 10 scale at subsequent child and family team meetings. When developing a scale as a care coordinator, you also want to ensure that you are clearly defining each point on the scale so that it's interpreted consistently and reliably by each individual who's going to be engaged in the rating of progress. So again, for example, if you have a rating scale of a 0 to 4, perhaps you would want to identify the 0 as equaling no progress, and the rating scale of 1 may indicate that we're a quarter of the way there, whereas the rating scale of 2 would indicate we're halfway there, and so on. From a research perspective, again, using an anchor point such as 0 is actually most helpful because it is really truly meaningful and identifiable to everyone who serves on the team and will be rating different items. When using a scale though to track progress in wraparound, we also need to ensure that we establish a baseline rating. And this should be occurring during phase 2 during initial plan development for each of these components, for that family vision, that team mission, and those underlying need statements. Again, this ensures that the team has a sense of where they're starting prior to implementing the plan of care, and really does set the stage for celebrating success and positive accomplishments over time. Establishing a baseline also helps to determine how much of an impact planning efforts are having and whether what we're doing is really making a difference in getting families and teams closer to their established goals. Before moving on, we also need to briefly talk about who rates what in wraparound. So the family vision, as Jennifer explained earlier, is really the family's ultimate goal for participation in wraparound. This is what families hope to see for themselves by the time they have completed formal wraparound. The family vision is rated only by the family and should be rated at each child and family team meeting. The team mission, on the other hand, is the goal of the entire team, including the youth and the family. And this is used to provide the team with direction and to build team cohesiveness. Team mission should be rated by every team member and every family member at each child and family team meeting. Finally, need statements. Underlying need statements are rated by the entire family, not only the individual that has the identified need, in order to determine each individual family member's perceived sense of progress towards meeting needs. Again, this should be done individually for each identified need statement that is in the plan of care and being planned around. Care coordinators should also ensure that they talk with family and team members at the initial child and family team meeting regarding how ratings are going to be elicited moving forward and how they'll be averaged. Some teams will have conversations and have every team member report out, including those youth and family members. And other teams may decide that they would like to use a voting system. They may ask individuals when they enter into a child and family team meeting to write their rating for these items on a Post-it note, and then the care coordinator could lead the team in creating an average to get an overall rating. Again, with these numbers, while the numbers themselves are important, there always should be facilitated discussion around the why. Why are individuals rating things the way that they are? That's really going to give meaning and purpose to the scale and the numbers that are decided upon at each meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we've discussed how to develop scales to track progress towards family vision, the team mission, and needs met, let's just take a look at a couple of family-friendly examples of rating scales that have been used in child and family team meetings. So as you can see from this slide, again, rating scales do not just have to be numbers alone. Scaling can also be done in more creative, youth and family-friendly ways in order to make the tracking of progress more relevant and meaningful to youth and families and teams. This slide and some of the examples on here demonstrate how families and teams have used things such as scoops of ice cream, a gas gauge, and laps on a racetrack to measure progress towards need met. Scales can also be adjusted to be meaningful based on the age and the developmental level of youth, and this really does help to insert the fun factor into the process for everyone on the team. Engaging the family and team to find out what they want their scales to look like is one way to really individualize Wraparound and ensures that we as practitioners are providing voice and choice to families and teams around how the team will track and measure progress. This is also an opportunity to build off of strengths and interests and aspects of family culture. So an example that I wanted to provide was from when I was a care coordinator back in the day. And I was actually partnering with a family and team where the youth was extremely passionate about astronomy. And he actually hoped to become an astronaut one day. With this in mind, the family and team actually decided to develop a rating scale for these components that use a planetary scale to track progress. So at one end of the spectrum, we established that Pluto, mind you, this was back in the day when Pluto was still a planet, equals no progress or very, very far away from achieving the goals that we had set. And at the other end, we established that the sun equaled a 10, meaning that we had made as much progress as possible. The closer the team moved towards the sun, the closer they were to achieving what we were measuring progress around, either the family vision, team mission, or needs met. And so there are a lot of really creative ways that you can actually design these scales to make them more meaningful and relevant to individuals. This slide also shows a couple of other examples that have been used for tracking various components in Wraparound. So again, you see that a team has chosen to use glasses of water to measure movement towards need met on, again, the 0 to 4 rating scale. Another team looks like they've chosen to use puzzle pieces to track how close the team was to putting the pieces together and achieving their established team mission. And then finally, we have a team that's used another 0 to 4 rating scale to track movement towards family vision by tracking how close the family minivan is to reaching its destination. Again, any of these examples could be discussed as options with the team and or unique culturally, developmentally appropriate options could be determined within the team. Really what's most important is we just want to ensure that whatever rating scale we're using and that we choose to use is consistent, clearly defined, and easily understood by everyone in the family and on the team. Just so everybody knows, these examples are actually going to be available for download following the webinar today in our NWI archive. So you'll be able to access them if you'd like to use them moving forward. All right, next slide, please, John. Okay, so next let's talk about how we track progress around established outcome statements in Wraparound. Outcome statements ensure that the plan stays focused on reducing the risk of out-of-home placement and addressing the reasons for referral to Wraparound, as Jennifer mentioned earlier. Again, the rationale is that if the team is addressing the underlying need, then the behaviors that brought the family into wraparound and the behaviors placing the youth and family at risk should decrease. In this respect, outcome statements truly help to tie the plan together. They clearly connect that reason for referral and at-risk behaviors, again, to other aspects of the plan of care. When considering outcome statements for caregivers and or other family members, such as siblings, the care coordinator should guide the team to consider how that individual is responding to the reasons for referral and or the impact that those at-risk behaviors are having on them. This may be an area actually where that parent-peer support partner can again help to contribute some really insightful information around how those behaviors are impacting caregivers and other members of the family and what those responses look like. Again, outcome statements should be established in a manner that's measurable, can be overtly tracked, and can be easily assessed from month to month and or child and family team meeting to child and family team meeting. When developing outcome statements, care coordinators should help the team to use language that they're comfortable with and create statements that address the behaviors that require immediate action and those behaviors that the team hopes to see change over time. Although care coordinators frequently want to word everything in very positive ways, for example, Johnny will have an increased number of positive days at home. What's really most important when we're developing outcome statements is that we ensure that we're actually targeting those referral or risk behaviors that led to wraparound and that are truly causing the most hardship and pain for families. Again, we need to ensure that we're doing that in order to track progress and to be able to show that we're moving in a positive direction. This also ensures that we're really honoring families and where they are in their lives and let them know that we're focusing on the things that are truly getting in the way of them being able to achieve their family vision. Once outcome statements have been developed with the team during that initial child and family team meeting, care coordinators should then guide the team to establish a baseline. This should really be done during phase 2 at that initial plan development, and the baseline should be around how often behavior is currently occurring. This helps to establish frequency and will provide direction so that family and team members can track if things are getting better and behaviors are changing. By monitoring progress towards outcome statements, we then can go back and measure against the established baseline at each CFTM and clearly document the progress in the plan of care. Overall outcome statements should focus on direction versus a targeted goal, should be simply stated in a way that everyone on the family and on the team can really rally around. John, I think that we're on the wrong slide right now. If we could just go a couple forward.
Yeah, we've also been having a little technical difficulties, I think, with the audio. Can folks write in and let us know if they can hear me?
Should I continue, or do we need to fix that first?
We've got some all goods. And it looks like Jennifer can hear us as well. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Wow, we've got a very active audience. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. So we had a little bit of a problem, but I think we're back on track. I've got the slides here. Kobe, am I on the right slide?
Yeah. I think you are, yeah. So
okay.
I just want to repeat the last piece that I said because I do think it's really important. And again, we want to ensure that overall outcome statements focus on a direction versus a targeted goal. And again, we want to ensure that these outcomes are simply stated in a way that everyone in the entire family and on the team can really understand and rally around. So I know that traditionally many folks are accustomed to developing SMART goals. We're going to talk about kind of what outcome statements can look like in wraparound. But again, oftentimes traditional outcome statement we might see in a wraparound plan of care is that Johnny will decrease physical aggression in the home from 1 time a day to once a week. So again, having that targeted goal. In wraparound, again, we really don't need to do that, and care coordinators should be able to guide teams to eliminate that target and just write the outcome statement in a simplistic way that still captures that information, such as Johnny will increase the number of days in the home without physical aggression, and then have a baseline of how frequently that's happening at this point in time, such as 1 time a day. Again, this can be done for several reasons, but one of them is that we want youth and families and teams to feel successful. We want them to be able to celebrate progress, no matter how small or how large that's occurring. We also want to ensure that we're not creating an all or nothing situation for youth and families. So again, that we're setting unrealistic expectations for behavior change, and that we're setting families up again for success rather than feelings of failure. It needs to be realistic. We also might want to use a baseline to avoid some of the pushback that I know many care coordinators have probably experienced in the past when we set a targeted goal. I know as a care coordinator, oftentimes, family and team members may not have been bought into the idea that the risk behavior could still occur at all. And so they felt like, the team was giving permission to individuals to behave in certain ways once a week, once a month, if we set that targeted outcome goal. So again, just ensuring that we're establishing how progress with outcome statements will be tracked, when it will be tracked, that frequency, and who will be responsible for tracking these changes. Again, this is what helps to make progress tracking active and really explicitly establishes the team's ongoing plan. Another area where peer support may be really helpful, again, is in ensuring not only that we're addressing the right behaviors and that we're looking at the right outcomes, but also peer support may often have a role in helping with the tracking progress aspect as well. For care coordinators, though, it's essential that we do this so that we can really hold team members and family members accountable from meeting to meeting. We also want to ensure that we're charting progress and presenting it to the team over time so that we can create some space when adjustments are needed. Next slide, please. Okay, so here you're going to see a couple of examples of what we just discussed. Again, these are all outcome statements in Wraparound that have been established during phase 2, during that initial plan of care development. We see that the first desired outcome was to increase the number of positive days at home. We had a baseline of 2 out of 7 good days right now. So again, 2 days a week is our baseline. The tracking plan here is clearly laid out, where each family member will note perceived number in a notebook each Sunday morning. So we would want to come back at subsequent ongoing child and family team meetings, and again, not only check that baseline is changing and that things are getting better, hopefully that we're having more good days in the home, but we also want to check that our tracking plan is working as well. So if for some reason the tracking plan is not, we may need to look at revising it. Another desired outcome we have is a decrease in office referrals at school. Perhaps that may have led to involvement in Wraparound. Currently, we see that there's a baseline of 12 referrals per week. We would expect that if our plan is working and we're moving closer to meeting needs, that baseline, again, is changing. And hopefully those referrals would be decreasing. Again, that tracking plan is the care coordinator will check in with the school weekly. It could be anyone who checks in with the school weekly. If there's a teacher on the team or a guidance counselor, they may be responsible for reporting that out as well. All right, next slide. All right, so finally, let's talk about how we track progress around strategies and tasks in Wraparound. So strategies are brainstormed around how to meet prioritized need statements rather than outcome statements. They should include a mix of formal and informal options, including any mandated services that need to be included. Once strategies have been selected, the care coordinator should guide the team to discuss what tasks need to be completed in order to accomplish each identified strategy. Tasks should then identify who's responsible for each action step and when the target completion date is. Again, we want to ensure that all tasks are documented clearly in the plan of care so that each team member knows what they are responsible for doing between between child and family team meetings. This again also makes it easier for the care coordinator to check in with team members on a weekly basis in between child and family team meetings to find out about follow-through, and then proactively address any barriers to completion that may emerge. Again, it's important for us to be as explicit as possible because this will help determine whether the lack of progress was due to an ineffective action step and or a strategy, or because an action step or strategy hasn't been fully implemented by the team. As progress around task completion and strategy implementation occurs, the care coordinator should encourage the team to celebrate positive accomplishments and successes during each child and family team meeting. Would you go to the next slide, please? The next two slides are really examples of possible strategies and task assignments that could appear in a plan of care. Could you click it one more time, please, John? One more. Let's go one more time. And last time. Oh, one more time, please. Thank you. All right. So now that we can see kind of how each task would be overtly tracked, completed tasks should clearly indicate the date the task was completed. So you'll see here that we have the task of John checking his work schedule to find a Saturday within the next 3 weeks to take Matthew around his old neighborhood was completed on 10/31/16. Again, it's dated and it indicates when it was completed. Again, strategies, if strategy 1 had been fully completed, we would want to mark that with the date of completion as well, but currently it appears that it is actually in progress, and there may be some additional tasks that need to be added in order for this strategy to fully be completed. Again, tracking should happen overtly throughout the implementation phase, or phase 3 of Wraparound, and we should really ensure that we're doing this at every child and family team meeting. Next slide, please. Thanks, John. So again, just another example of strategy and task review and how that can be tracked. As you see, we have some tasks that have not been fully completed, but might be longer-term tasks. And so we have Adam tracking clinical measures and reporting back to the team around progress. That's something that it sounds like is going to be going on for at least 16 weeks. As the strategy number 2 is about Matthew participating in some sort of counseling with Adam, and that's currently in progress, and it requires 16 weeks. Okay. So again, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, I just want to reiterate that it's really important for us to remember that just because tasks are being accomplished and strategies are being implemented, it doesn't mean that the plan is working or that we're getting any closer to meeting our needs, creating behavior change, achieving the family vision, or achieving the team mission. Progress around strategy and task indicator of progress in Wraparound, and really needs to be looked at in conjunction with all these other tracking measures.
So now I am, okay, can you hear me? Covey just gave some good examples about how to actually track strategies and implementation and task accomplishment. And we want to go back a little bit to talk about, you know, as she said, it's still extremely important to be tracking these other things, whether or not you're meeting needs, whether or not certain behavioral changes are happening. And so we wanted to give a couple of examples of how to actually use that data, how to display it, and how to track it. So there are a couple of different ways, and one is just a very simple data table. So you might be tracking task completion, but these higher level monitoring really creates data that can be tracked and displayed in this simple way. And this might be enough for most of your teams to just have a table that you can enter in what are you tracking, and then on a monthly basis or however frequently your formal child and family team meetings are, you can put in the ratings. And this can just be a piece of paper that goes into the care plan, or there might be ways to build it out into an EHR or use Excel or something like that. You know, every time you go in and you just update it, and then you can have a conversation as a team about, Are we making progress? Are we seeing change here? So you can see in this example, it takes a good 3-4 months for the family to feel any progress towards meeting their vision. And if you're only tracking that, that might feel like a really long time. But if you go down to the outcome statement about the number of positive days at home each week, you can see again that maybe some of that kind of slow progress in family vision is because it actually goes down in the first couple of months, and then it starts to increase. So you can see also when you stack up all of these things that you could be tracking, if you stack them up and look at them together, you can also start to see how they're interconnected. So the family is feeling positive as the youth's behavior at home is changing, and as the youth's behavior at home changes, it looks like they're starting to have fewer office referrals at school. And so you can start to talk about, as a team, how are these things working together? Are we actually seeing progress towards meeting the need, but we're not seeing the behavioral changes? Maybe that indicates that the need isn't correctly articulated, or somehow, or maybe you're not tracking the right behaviors. So you can have conversations about that when you see any sort of discrepancies or interplay. But this is just an example of a very simple data table. It might be sufficient for your team's needs, and you just need to be able to put all of the information in one place, again, to be able to use the information to inform plan of care adjustments. John, can you go to the next slide, please? Another example, if you have more visual learners or you feel comfortable graphing, these are very simple graphs, basically the same information as above, or as the previous slide, but here you're simply plotting the months in wraparound on the bottom, the x-axis, to the rating on the y-axis. So you can start to see here that you can track each item on its own graph. That way you can look at it individually. But again, if you have it all on one page, you can start to talk about the interplay. So, as the number of positive days go up in the home, the family starts to feel like they're meeting their vision. And maybe that's really inherently tied to their family vision. And as things are starting to go better at home, the school behavior improves, and the number of days that the youth is referred to the school office is going down. So, again, if you put them all together in one place, you can really start to have good conversations about whether or not the plan of care is working in total, whether or not all of those logical connections between the tasks and the strategies, whether or not those are actually meeting the underlying need, and whether or not meeting that underlying need is actually creating the behavior change that a lot of the team members are around the table hoping for. So you might have school officials who are really focused on that lower graph about the number of office referrals, but hopefully by giving them information about all the other things that the team is working on, they can appreciate the complexity of what's going on with this family. They can appreciate the progress that is being made, even if it takes several months to see a change in office referrals. And again, that really keeps the team members more engaged and helps them understand that progress is being made, but that it's slow, it's complicated, and that it's nuanced. So this is one way of tracking it. John, next slide, please. Another way of presenting the information is just all in one graph. So we have a data table, we have one graph per each item, or you can put all of the items on one graph, understanding that they might have different scales. So here we're looking at the blue line, which is progress towards the family vision, the red line, which is progress towards meeting the need, and those are on a 0 to 4 scale. And then the days suspended, obviously, 0 to 7, and the depression scale is on a, I believe, a 1 to 9 or 0 to 9. So again, here, this might be a more useful way, and this all depends on the family and the team's preferences. All of this should be individualized based on the care coordinator, the youth and family, and the team. What they mutually agree is the best way to track what they're trying to track. But again, this really, putting it all in one graph can help have those conversations about how these things are interconnected. This is another opportunity to also look at, this youth, this is a hypothetical youth, but the youth has supposedly been involved in Wraparound for about a year. which is often a time that people start to talk about transition, or if they need to transition for funding reasons. And here you can start to have a conversation. Clearly a lot of progress was made over the 12 months, but what's happening in those last couple of months? It looks like the school behavior got better and now it's ticking up. The depression decreased and now it's ticking up in that last month. And so a conversation can be had here. Is that enough? Is progress enough that we can start to transition, or has something changed? What's causing the uptick in depression and the uptick in the days of suspended at school? And that might be a felt issue that the team has and understands. Maybe there's something going on here, but until it's actually being tracked and actually put down into concrete numbers, it might just be you're attending to the crisis and you're not ready to say, actually, this is looking pretty good and I think we're stabilized. This is normal variation. For this youth and family, they'll need some aftercare services. It's not enough to not transition them. Or you might have a different response to the information at hand. But again, here, hopefully you can see the power of tracking things over time in a concrete way. You can celebrate the successes and you can start to look at trends. And you can start to see the interplay between all of the complex issues that a family is presenting. So these are just a couple of options and different ways to use the information that we suggest that you gather. John, next slide. And this all comes down to, it's extremely important not to just collect the data, put it in a table, put it in a graph, and put it aside in the chart. We're sharing all this information and really encouraging tracking and monitoring, because the most important thing is that you use the information to adjust the plan. The data means nothing if it's not being used to improve the plan of care, to identify what's working and what's not working in the most rapid and efficient way possible, and then to adjust the plan and continue to track the same information. So if you make care plan adjustments mid-course and then you see an improvement, you can probably say it's because we changed those strategies. So that's the most important thing. Kobe, did you want to share something on this slide as well?
No, I just think that just to mention that it should be really an overt discussion with, again, the family and the entire team.
Yes.
So again, we're really focused on that data that you showed on those previous slides, and we're employing that when we're having these conversations so we can make some informed decisions about what aspects of the plan of care may need to be adjusted or revised.
Yeah. So again, by having this information at your fingertips, it can help you celebrate successes. But that, I think, is something that often is happening in Wraparound, because people have really embraced and are really working the principles of being strengths-based and being youth and family-driven. But the data can really also help you dig into why progress is not happening. Why is this family stalling out? Why are they not getting closer to transition? And bringing to the forefront any discrepancies, bringing to the forefront any issues with the assumptions within the care plan about how things are going to work together. And just as Kobe said, if you really encourage people, if you collect all the information and then have them reflect on why there might be differences in their rating, why, between team members, family members, or why there's change over time, again, that can really spark some really good information that's very focused on progress, not focused on specifically kind of what happened most immediately before the child and family team meeting, but why are you here? What is progress? What does it look like? How is it going? And really engage in that active planning, which should be happening throughout the entire implementation phase.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So next slide, Kobe.
All right. So now that we all have a better idea about what to track, why to track it, and how to most effectively track outcome measures in Wraparound, the next step is to ensure that the process is actually being tracked at each child and family team meeting and documented in each plan of care. So the first question that we really need to ask ourselves as practitioners is, does our plan of care document have a place where progress can be overtly tracked in the documentation during each child and family team meeting around all of those components that we discussed today? So again, where do we put ratings regarding family vision and team mission in the documentation, if this is something that you haven't been tracking already? Is there a section in your plan of care where ratings around movement towards need Needs statements can be clearly documented and tracked over time. Where do you record your progress around outcome statements and behavior change, strategy implementation, past accomplishment? Again, these should be explicitly built into the plan of care document, updated at every child and family team meeting to reflect that progress or lack thereof, and provided to each family and team member within a timely fashion, immediately following that child and family team meeting. So that way it can be utilized and the plan can be implemented. Again, this data can be used to really determine whether sufficient progress has been made to warrant that transition out of wraparound over time, as Jennifer's mentioned earlier. Next slide. Another helpful tool that we really need to consider, and John, you can just click all of those. Thanks. That care coordinators can use to ensure that outcome measures are being tracked during child and family team meetings is a structured agenda. This structured agenda should clearly outline what will be tracked, when it will be tracked during the child and family team meeting, and can serve as a guide for the care coordinator. This may sound like common sense to many on the webinar today, but I found it so interesting that research actually indicates that less than half of all teams actually use a structured agenda to guide the child and family team meeting. So again, this is a real opportunity for us care coordinators and practitioners of wraparound. Child and family team meeting agendas should be developed in conjunction with youth and families. They should be distributed to each team member at the child and family team meeting and used as a guide when facilitating by the care coordinator. This ensures that nothing's missed or overlooked during the meeting. It also helps to ensure that we're holding everyone accountable, monitoring outcomes of progress, and ensures that that principle of outcome-based is really being operationalized in our practice during each and every child and family team meeting.
Can I also say that a key thing here is that you're collecting the data as close to possible at the beginning of the meeting as possible for all the things that you're tracking, and that will help you choose what you want to prioritize. So we often see teams collect information, on one need, talk about that need, on the next need, talk about that need. But if you collect everything up front, it will help you prioritize what you need to talk about in terms of how to make the most progress.
Great, thanks, Jen. All right, so now let's go to the next slide, John, and I believe that we have our final poll for the day.
We do, and I'm going to launch that right now.
All right. So our poll is about how different is what was just described to you from what you're currently doing in your practice.
Yeah, and we've got about a third of people that have voted, and I just want to thank the 130 some odd folks that have stayed with us even through the technical problems we were having. And we'll give folks just a few more seconds. Looks like we have a question about clarification on the poll. How different is what you described from what we currently do, like the training is a question mark. So I'm not sure if we are going to be able to answer that.
I think the idea was, we just asked, at the beginning we asked, what do you currently track? And then we went into detail about how we suggest tracking and what to track. So now the question is, given what we just said, given what we just suggested, how different is what we just suggested, in terms of the 0 to 4 ratings, looking at behavioral outcomes and family vision and that kind of stuff. How different is what we just described from what you're currently doing to track progress?
And thanks, Jennifer. That seemed to answer the question. And we've got most of the folks that have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. And we're going to share the results.
All right. So great. It looks like what we talked about today is somewhat different for 71% of participants. And so we're really, really hoping that you found this webinar to be informative and useful in helping you and your staff to kind of take the next steps in outcome tracking and wraparound. We have 18% who found this very different. And so hopefully this is really giving you some good ideas around how you can be more outcome-based moving forward. Next slide, please. And yes. So in conclusion, Jennifer and I just wanted to end with a quote that we think kind of puts what we discussed today into perspective. Numbers have an important story to tell. They rely on you to give them a clear and convincing voice. We hope that all of you today on this call have recognized how essential data is when tracking progress and informing decision-making in Wraparound. We also hope that you're going to be able to apply some of the things that you've learned today, and again, we'll continue to move that principle of outcome-based forward in Wraparound practice. I think we now just have a few minutes left for some questions and comments. I know that we covered a lot of this information very, very quickly, but John, have you seen any comments or questions come in the chat box?
Can I just say before, as people start to drop off, because I know we've just reached the 12 o'clock mark or the 3 o'clock mark, I just want to make sure that people do know that there is an addendum document to this webinar that goes into even more detail about how to be outcomes-based. It goes through all of the phases and activities of Wraparound and gives opportunities and ways to be more outcomes-based. That will be available with the archive of this webinar, along with the family-friendly progress rating scale images that Covey shared. So I just, as people I see are kind of dropping off because we've met our time, I just want to make sure people know, come back. The webinar should be up at the end of the day with those additional resources if you want to do more learning. So I just wanted to say that before we left. Yeah.
Yeah, and with that, I just wanted to note that we didn't really receive a lot of questions. We did get some comments from folks that they found it helpful. And yes, we will have access to the recording. Why don't we just show those links right now? First of all, we wanted to just say thank you to Jennifer and to Covey, and these are their email addresses in case you have questions maybe you'd want to ask offline, since we didn't seem to have a lot of questions come in today. And this is the link from which you'll be able to see all of those resources. So the recording, as you can see, the slides and the polls will all be available, as well as any supporting reference materials, and that's the link that you'll need. So let's see, did we get a couple of more questions here? I'm just checking. Let's see, we had a question about adapting the presentation without calling it Wraparound, which has a programmatic definition in our state. Can we do that? So can we adapt the presentation and not call it Wraparound because it appears that there's a state programmatic definition?
Do you mean, does the person mean taking the slides and using them? Or, I mean, these are all kind of like basic principles. It's not like we're, saying that these are proprietary ways of tracking progress or anything like that. I think that would be probably most appropriate as an email to Covey and myself, and then we can kind of discuss how you were hoping to use the slides.
Okay.
And yeah, because it is a formal product of the TA Center, and I'm not quite sure how it can be used or altered, frankly.
Yep, and this is the email addresses that you would use. That's for the questioner, and she said, yes, will do, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see, we had one other question. See, for my team, we measure the goal which is directly related to the need. I don't think this is too different from what you presented here. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think that what we oftentimes see as we go across different programs in different states is that sometimes the language that's being used is different in plans of care. We used, again, the language that we use in the NWI model of Wraparound, and so it sounds to me like you're saying that you may use the term goal rather than outcome. And so I would say that, yeah, however that sort of makes sense and is most relevant, but even if it is the goal that you're looking at, I would expect that it should probably relate back to that reason for referral or those risk behaviors that have led to involvement in Wraparound.
Okay, great. And I'm not really seeing any more questions coming in, but you can always write into the National Wraparound Initiative website if you have questions. We had our email addresses for our presenters, Jennifer and Covey, up here, and I just wanted to also draw your attention again to where the resources will be available. And with that, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate those about 100 of us that stayed a little bit later, and that's about all the time we have for today. I want to again thank our presenters for the time and effort they put into preparing this presentation. And I'd like to remind the audience that the webinar slides will be published online shortly with our collection of past webinars from the link that you see in front of you. And we hope that you'll join us for a future webinar next time. And thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.